My name is Ahmed, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been deeply intertwined with the teachings and practices of Islam. From a young age, my identity, values, and sense of purpose were built upon the foundation of my faith. I was born into a devout Muslim family where Islam was not just a set of beliefs. It was the guiding principle behind every decision, every action, and every moment of our daily lives. Faith was more than a tradition. It was the heartbeat of our existence. Each day began and ended with the rhythm of prayer. 5 times a day, I would bow in submission, reciting the sacred verses of the Quran. These prayers weren't just rituals. They were moments of connection, an intimate dialogue with Allah that reaffirmed my devotion and commitment to the straight path, as outlined in Islamic teachings. My earliest memories are filled with the melodic recitations of my father during far prayer, the quiet murmur of supplications in our home, and the collective unity of worship at the mosque. The mosque was more than a place of worship for me. It was a sanctuary. It was where I found solace, a refuge from the noise of the world. Within those walls, I felt a sense of peace that grounded me. It was where I sought guidance, where I listened to sermons that reinforced the truths of Islam, and where I built relationships with others who shared the same unwavering faith. My life revolved around these teachings, and I took immense pride in being a faithful servant of Allah. As I grew older, my dedication only deepened. I immersed myself in Islamic scholarship, seeking a deeper understanding of the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I memorized key surahs, studied the hadiths, and spent hours reading interpretations and reflections by esteemed scholars. I found joy and purpose in this pursuit of knowledge, believing that it would strengthen my faith and secure my place in eternal paradise. The Quran shaped my worldview, providing answers to my questions about life, morality, and the nature of existence itself. To me, faith was not merely a belief. It was an active practice, a way of living. Every moment of my life felt aligned with the principles of Islam. From fasting during Ramadan to giving zakat, charity, I embraced these practices wholeheartedly, seeing them as expressions of my love and submission to Allah. I believed that my devotion and discipline would lead me to salvation, that my life of prayer, fasting, and good deeds would one day tip the scales in my favor on the day of judgment. This sense of purpose gave my life structure and meaning. It provided me with a moral compass, guiding my actions and decisions. I was proud of my faith, proud of the life I was building around it, and certain that I was on the right path. My family and community reinforced these beliefs, celebrating the virtues of devotion and discipline, and I found comfort in knowing I was part of something greater than myself. Yet, even in the midst of this certainty, a subtle, unspoken tension lingered beneath the surface. I was deeply committed to my faith, but the seeds of doubt, however small and fleeting, were there, buried beneath years of study and prayer. At this point in my life, however, they were easy to dismiss. I had everything I needed to feel secure: the teachings of the Quran, the prayers, the rituals, and the unwavering support of my family and community. For me, life was simple and straightforward. Islam provided clarity, a sense of direction, and a foundation that I believed was unshakable. It was my compass, my anchor, and the source of my identity. Little did I know that the journey ahead would challenge everything I had built my life upon, leading me down a path I could have never imagined. Despite my unwavering commitment to Islam, there were moments, fleeting yet persistent, when I found myself grappling with questions I could not easily answer. These thoughts would creep in during the quietest hours of the night, moments when the world around me was still, and I was left alone with my mind. They were not questions of rebellion or disbelief, but of uncertainty, curiosity, and a fear I didn't fully understand. I had been taught that on the day of judgment, my deeds, both good and bad, would be weighed on a divine scale. This teaching was clear, and I believed it wholeheartedly. I knew that every prayer, every fast, every charitable act contributed to the balance of my soul. But what if my efforts weren't enough? What if, despite my devotion, the sins I had committed outweighed the good I had done? This question lingered in the recesses of my mind like a faint shadow, never quite disappearing no matter how hard I tried to suppress it. Late at night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I would find myself asking, have I truly done enough? Am I worthy of salvation? The Quran spoke often of Allah's mercy and forgiveness, yet it also emphasized the importance of obedience and good deeds. I knew that no one was perfect, and I had made mistakes like anyone else. But the fear of falling short haunted me. It wasn't just the fear of punishment, it was the fear of disappointing Allah, of failing to meet the standards I had set for myself and the standards I believed were required for eternal salvation. These moments of doubt were not constant. They came and went, often in the quiet solitude of the night. During the day, I was surrounded by the rhythm of my faith, prayers, study, community, and these doubts felt distant, almost trivial. But in the silence, they returned, whispering questions I didn't know how to answer. I began to wonder about the nature of God and salvation itself. What did it truly mean to be saved? How could I know if my devotion was enough? I believed in Allah's justice, but justice, by its very nature, was impartial. What if my sins outweighed my good deeds by even the smallest margin? Would a lifetime of faith and effort be undone by my imperfections? Another question that gnawed at me was the concept of intentions versus actions. Islam teaches that intentions are critical, that Allah sees the purity of the heart. Yet, intentions alone weren't enough. They needed to be accompanied by righteous deeds. This balance between inner sincerity and outward action felt delicate, and I feared that I might falter in one or both. The thought of standing before Allah, unprepared and unworthy, filled me with an anxiety I couldn't easily shake. I also wrestled with a deeper, more existential question. Why was salvation so dependent on my effort? If Allah was all-merciful, why did I feel such an overwhelming pressure to strive and earn His favor? Why did the weight of my own soul rest entirely on my shoulders? These thoughts were not accusations. They were born out of a sincere desire to understand. I wanted to believe with my whole heart that I was walking the right path, but the doubts were there, no matter how hard I tried to bury them. Prayer and study became my refuge. Whenever these thoughts arose, I would turn to the Quran, seeking answers in its verses. I would spend hours in supplication, asking Allah to strengthen my faith and silence the questions that plagued me. And for a time it would work. The rhythm of my prayers, the familiarity of the words, and the comfort of community would quiet my doubts, making them seem like nothing more than passing distractions. Yet the questions never truly left me. They lingered in the background, waiting for moments of stillness to resurface. I told no one about these struggles, not my family, not my friends. To admit that I had doubts felt like admitting weakness, or worse, a lack of faith. And so, I carried them alone, convincing myself that they were just tests from Allah, challenges meant to strengthen my resolve. Still, there was a part of me, a small, hidden part, that wondered if there was something more, something I was missing. It wasn't that I doubted Islam itself. I was confident in my belief in Allah, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the guidance of the Quran. But there was an unease I couldn't explain, a quiet voice in my heart that asked if I truly understood the full picture. These doubts didn't dominate my life, but they were there, buried beneath layers of devotion and discipline, waiting for the moment when they could no longer be ignored. It was a day like any other, one I had no reason to suspect would change the course of my life forever. I was visiting my family in another city, enjoying the company of my younger brother as we discussed theology and life. The day began as all my days did, with far prayer, followed by my usual morning supplications. It was routine, familiar, comforting. The quiet hum of life surrounded me as the morning turned to afternoon, and I felt a deep sense of peace, wrapped in the rhythm of my faith. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to feel an unusual discomfort in my chest. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable, and I dismissed it as indigestion or fatigue from the long journey to visit my family. I continued my day, ignoring the faint unease, confident that it was nothing serious. After all, I was young, healthy, and disciplined in my lifestyle. I ate well, exercised regularly, and most importantly, maintained a spiritual life centered on prayer and devotion. There was no reason to suspect that anything could be wrong. By evening, however, the discomfort had grown sharper, morphing into a stabbing pain that made it difficult to breathe. I winced with each breath, clutching my chest as the pain intensified. My brother noticed immediately, his concerned eyes scanning my face. "Ahmed, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with alarm. "I'm fine," I replied, attempting to downplay the situation. "It's probably just something I ate. It'll pass." But deep down, I knew something was wrong. This wasn't the ordinary discomfort of a heavy meal or a restless day. It was something deeper, something more ominous. My brother wasn't convinced. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly, grabbing his keys. I protested, as I always did when it came to medical issues. I had never been one to rush to doctors or hospitals. "It's nothing serious," I insisted. "Just give me a moment to rest and I'll be fine." But the pain didn't subside. Instead, it worsened, radiating through my chest and making it nearly impossible to stand. By the time we arrived at the emergency room, I could barely walk. My brother practically carried me inside, his worry etched deeply into his face. The hospital was a blur of lights, voices, and hurried footsteps. The doctors wasted no time, assessing my condition and running tests as I lay on the hospital bed. Their expressions grew increasingly serious with each passing moment, their hushed conversations adding to the tension in the air. I tried to focus on their words, but the pain was all-consuming, a relentless pressure in my chest that refused to relent. Within an hour, the diagnosis was clear. I was experiencing a severe heart attack. The words hit me like a hammer. A heart attack? At my age? It didn't make sense. I was only in my late 20s, young and full of life. How could this be happening to me? I had always taken care of myself, avoiding the vices that others my age indulged in. I didn't smoke or drink. I exercised regularly and followed a healthy diet. And most importantly, I prayed diligently, keeping my faith at the center of my life. How could this happen to someone like me? As the doctors worked to stabilize me, a wave of fear washed over me, fear unlike anything I had ever known. My thoughts raced, tumbling over one another in a chaotic storm. Was this how it would end? Was I about to meet my Creator, unprepared and uncertain? The reality of my mortality hit me with full force, and I was overcome by the weight of all the prayers I hadn't yet offered, the deeds I hadn't yet completed, the life I hadn't yet lived. I thought of my family, my parents, my siblings, my brother who sat just outside the room, his hands clenched tightly in prayer. What would they do without me? What would they think if this was how my life ended? So abruptly, so unexpectedly. And then, the most terrifying thought of all struck me. Am I ready to stand before Allah? Have I truly done enough? The room began to blur, the voices of the medical staff fading into the background. The harsh fluorescent lights above me seemed to dim as my vision narrowed. My chest felt like it was being crushed, each breath more labored than the last. Panic surged through me as I realized I was losing control. This was it. This was the moment I had feared in the quiet hours of the night, the moment I had prayed I would be ready for. But I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready at all. With the last remnants of my strength, I whispered the Shahada, the declaration of faith. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Over and over, I repeated it, clinging to the words like a lifeline, desperate to hold onto the one thing I believed could save me. My voice grew weaker with each repetition until, finally, I couldn't speak at all. And then, everything went dark. For a moment, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, no light. Just silence. A silence so profound it was almost deafening. But within that silence, I felt something, a presence. It was faint at first, like the faintest whisper of wind, but it grew stronger, more tangible as though someone, something, was waiting for me. This was not the end. It couldn't be. Somewhere deep within me, I sensed that this moment was only the beginning of something far greater, something I couldn't yet comprehend. Little did I know, My life was about to take a turn I could never have anticipated, and nothing would ever be the same again. When the darkness enveloped me, I expected to feel nothing, a void, a complete absence of existence. But what I experienced instead was something entirely unexpected. Slowly, an awareness returned to me, but it was unlike anything I had ever known. It felt as though I was awake, but I wasn't in my body anymore. It began as a strange sensation, a feeling of detachment. When I opened my eyes, or what felt like my eyes, I realized I wasn't lying on the hospital bed anymore. Instead, I was above it, floating weightlessly in the air. I could see everything clearly, the bright hospital lights, the frantic doctors and nurses working to stabilize my body, the beeping of the machines. I saw my own body lying there, lifeless, pale, and motionless, with wires and tubes connected to it. The sight was both surreal and terrifying. That was me, but it wasn't me. I wasn't in that body anymore. I noticed my younger brother standing in the corner of the room, gripping the edge of a chair so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. His face was pale, his eyes filled with worry and fear. He looked as though the world had just been pulled out from under him, and my heart ached for him. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, to tell him that I was still here, that everything was going to be okay. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't move. It was as if I were an invisible observer, tethered to a different reality, able to see but completely unable to interact. Oddly enough, I didn't feel panic. In fact, I felt a strange, almost unnatural sense of calm. It was as though the part of me that should have been terrified had been silenced. I wasn't in pain anymore. The crushing pressure in my chest was gone. Instead, I felt weightless, detached, and yet aware. My mind raced as I tried to process what was happening. What is this? Am I dead? The thought sent a chill through me. My faith had always taught me that after death, the soul would be judged. Deeds would be weighed, and one's eternal fate would be decided. But this wasn't what I had expected. There were no angels, no judgment, no divine courtroom. There was only me, floating above my body, caught between confusion and an eerie stillness. And then I noticed it, a light. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen before. It didn't come from the hospital room or any earthly source. This light was alive, radiant, soft, yet impossibly intense. It pulsed gently as if it had a heartbeat of its own, and it seemed to pierce straight through me, touching a part of my being I didn't even know existed. The light didn't blind me, nor did it frighten me. Instead, it drew me in. It felt warm, inviting, and indescribably peaceful, as though it were calling to me. The pull of the light was immediate and undeniable. It wasn't physical, yet I felt myself being drawn toward it, as though the core of my being was magnetized to it. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Every instinct told me to resist, to stay rooted in the reality I knew, but the light's pull was irresistible. It wasn't just a light. It was a presence, one that seemed to speak to me without words. It reached deep into my soul, stirring emotions I couldn't fully understand. The hospital room around me began to fade. The sounds of the monitors, the voices of the doctors, even the sight of my brother, all of it started to dissolve, replaced by the all-encompassing brightness of the light. It felt as though I was being carried through a tunnel, the light growing closer with every passing moment. At first, I resisted. I wasn't ready to let go. But as the warmth of the light enveloped me, I realized that resistance was futile. The pull wasn't forceful, it was gentle, yet absolute. As I moved closer, a deep, indescribable peace began to wash over me, and I knew, somehow, that this was the beginning of something extraordinary. As I moved deeper into the light, the warmth I had felt before now completely surrounded me. It wasn't just warmth, it was love, a love so pure and overwhelming that it brought tears to my eyes. This love wasn't like anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't conditional or earned. It simply was. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, completely known, flaws and all, and yet entirely accepted. And then, through the brilliance of the light, a figure began to emerge. At first, it was difficult to discern what I was seeing. The figure radiated a presence so powerful, so majestic, that I was immediately struck by a profound sense of awe. As the figure stepped closer, I began to see more clearly. He was unlike anyone I had ever encountered. His presence carried an authority that was undeniable, yet it was tempered with a kindness and compassion that were equally overwhelming. His very being seemed to emanate love, and I felt it wash over me in waves, filling me with a peace I had never known. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, though my voice felt small and insignificant in the enormity of the moment. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to pierce straight into my soul. They weren't condemning or judgmental, but deeply understanding, as though he could see every hidden corner of my being and still love me completely. "I am Jesus," he said. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. Jesus? My mind raced as I tried to process what I was hearing. As a Muslim, I had always respected Jesus as a prophet, a great prophet even, but nothing more. The idea that he could be the Son of God was something I had dismissed outright, something I had debated against time and time again. And yet, here he was, standing before me, more real and more alive than anything I had ever experienced. "This isn't possible," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "You're just a prophet. How can this be?" Jesus smiled, a smile filled with patience, understanding, and kindness. "You have many questions, Ahmed," he said gently, "and I am here to help you find the answers." Before I could respond, the world around us began to shift. Scenes appeared in the light, vivid and full of life, as though I were being transported to another time and place. I saw moments I recognized from Islamic teachings. Jesus healing the sick, giving sight to the blind, even raising the dead. These were miracles I had always believed in, but seeing them now carried a weight I couldn't ignore. The compassion in his touch, the authority in his words, it was unlike anything I had ever imagined. And then the scenes changed. I saw moments I recognized not from the Quran, but from the Bible. I saw Jesus at the Last Supper, speaking to his disciples with a love that transcended human understanding. I saw him praying in the garden, his anguish palpable as he prepared to sacrifice himself. And then I saw the crucifixion. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I saw the nails, the crown of thorns, the pain etched into his face. But even in his agony, there was something else, something I had never understood before. There was purpose. There was love. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why would you do this?" "For you," he said simply. "For all of you." The weight of his words sank into me. My understanding of salvation had always been tied to deeds, to earning favor through effort and obedience. The idea that someone would willingly take on the burden of humanity's sins out of love was almost too much to comprehend. Yet here he was, telling me that it was true. As the visions continued, I realized something profound. This was not just an encounter. It was an invitation to see the truth, to understand grace, and to accept the love that had been offered to me all along. And in that moment, my heart began to open in a way it never had before. After meeting Jesus, the world around us began to shift once again. The light grew brighter, and I felt as though I was being carried to another realm. The warmth I had felt earlier deepened, wrapping around me like a comforting embrace. I wasn't sure where I was being taken, but I knew I was about to see something extraordinary. The first thing I saw was heaven. Words could never fully describe what I witnessed. It was a place of indescribable beauty and peace, unlike anything I had ever imagined. The colors were more vibrant than anything I had seen on earth, as though they were alive. The air itself seemed to hum with a sense of harmony and joy. Everything about this place radiated love and perfection. In the distance, I saw people, countless people of every kind, laughing, embracing, and moving freely. Their faces glowed with an inner joy that seemed to transcend words, as though they were finally complete. There was no pain, no suffering, no sadness, only love, pure and overwhelming. I could feel it all around me, as though the very essence of this place was alive with God's presence. "This is heaven," Jesus said, his voice filled with warmth. "This is what it means to be united with God." I stood there in awe, overwhelmed by the beauty and peace of it all. This was the fulfillment of every prayer, every hope, every longing for something greater than this world. It's perfect, I said, barely able to speak. This is what I've prayed for my entire life. Jesus nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. It is the fulfillment of God's promise. But it is not earned by deeds alone. It is a gift, given freely through faith. His words struck me deeply. All my life, I had believed that salvation was something to be earned, that it was the result of a lifetime of striving, fasting, praying, and doing enough good to outweigh my sins. But here was Jesus, showing me that heaven wasn't about earning. It was about grace. It wasn't about what I could do, it was about accepting what God had already done. Before I could fully process the beauty of heaven and the depth of Jesus' words, the scene began to change again. The brightness and warmth faded, replaced by a cold, oppressive darkness. The shift was immediate and unsettling. I felt the weight of the air grow heavy, pressing down on me like a physical burden. The warmth I had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a chilling emptiness that pierced me to my very soul. "This is hell," Jesus said, his tone sorrowful. "This is separation from God." At first, I didn't want to see it. I wanted to look away, to turn back to the beauty of heaven, but the vision grew clearer. In the shadows, I saw figures moving, their faces contorted in pain and regret. Their cries were anguished and desperate, filled with longing and despair. They reached out, searching for something, or someone, but there was no answer. The emptiness was overwhelming, and the despair was unlike anything I had ever known. "Why?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Why do they suffer like this?" "They chose separation," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sorrow. "God's love is offered to everyone, but not everyone accepts it. Hell is not a place of God's wrath, it is the absence of His presence. It is the natural result of rejecting the gift of salvation." The weight of his words hit me like a wave. I had always thought of hell as a place of punishment, a manifestation of God's anger. But Jesus was showing me something different. Hell was not about punishment, it was about separation. It was about the absence of God, the absence of love, peace, and hope. And the thought of anyone being in that place, cut off from God, filled me with a sorrow I couldn't explain. Even in the midst of the darkness, I felt Jesus' love radiating from him. His heart ached for the souls that had chosen to turn away, and I could feel the depth of his compassion. "Do you understand now, Ahmed?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine. "The choices you make in life matter, not because of what you can earn, but because of the relationship you choose to have with God." Tears streamed down my face as the truth of his words sank in. I had spent my entire life striving, praying, and fasting, trying to be good enough, trying to tip the scales in my favor. But in this moment, I realized that all God wanted was my heart. He wasn't asking for perfection, he was asking for faith. He wasn't asking me to earn his love, he was asking me to accept it. As the visions of heaven and hell faded, I found myself once again standing in the presence of Jesus. The light surrounded us, alive and vibrant, and the warmth of his love filled me completely. I felt humbled, overwhelmed, and yet at peace all at once. Everything I had seen, the beauty of heaven, the despair of hell, and the truths Jesus had shared, had shaken the very foundation of my beliefs. Jesus looked at me with eyes full of understanding, as though he could see the struggle within me. "Ahmed," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "will you accept my gift? Will you trust me to lead you to the Father?" My heart felt like it might burst. This wasn't just a question, it was an invitation, a call to step into something greater than myself. It was a call to surrender everything I thought I knew, to let go of the striving and fear that had defined my life, and to embrace the grace and love that Jesus was offering. I hesitated not out of doubt, but out of the weight of the moment. Everything I had believed, everything I had built my life upon, was being called into question. But deep down I knew the truth. I could feel it in every part of me. Jesus wasn't just a prophet. He was the way, the truth, and the life. And he was standing before me, inviting me to follow him. "Yes," I said finally, my voice breaking with emotion. "I trust you." The light around us grew brighter, and I felt a peace unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't just peace, it was freedom. Freedom from the fear of not being good enough. Freedom from the burden of striving to earn God's love. Freedom from the doubts that had haunted me for so long. As I stood there, wrapped in the warmth of His presence, Jesus spoke again. "There is more for you to do," He said, His tone filled with purpose. "You must return and share what you have seen. There are people who need to hear your story, Ahmed. They need to know the truth." The thought of returning filled me with a mix of emotions. I didn't want to leave this place. I didn't want to leave the peace, the love, the presence of Jesus. But I knew He was right. He had given me a purpose and I couldn't ignore it. "I will be with you always," Jesus said, His words echoing in my heart. With those words, the light began to shift, and I felt a pull, a gentle but undeniable force, drawing me back to the world I had left behind. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew one thing for certain: my life would never be the same again. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room above me. The warmth and radiance of the divine light were gone, replaced by the sterile, cold reality of the physical world. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend where I was. The vibrant colors, the indescribable peace, and the overwhelming presence of love I had just experienced were now distant memories, and I found myself lying back in my frail, mortal body. The beeping of machines filled the room, a stark contrast to the serene silence of the otherworldly realm I had just left. My chest burned with pain, each breath labored, but I was alive. Alive. The word felt heavy and foreign in that moment. I had been certain I was leaving this world for good, but now I was here again. It was as if I had been pulled back from the edge of eternity, thrust into a reality that suddenly felt small and pale in comparison to what I had seen. "Ahmed, he's back," one of the doctors exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency and relief. I blinked, my vision blurry, trying to focus on the figures moving around me. Their hurried movements and serious expressions made it clear that they hadn't expected me to survive. One of them leaned closer, shining a light into my eyes and calling my name repeatedly. Slowly, I began to piece together where I was and what had happened. Then I saw my brother. His face came into view, his eyes wide with shock and relief. Tears streamed down his face as he leaned over me, gripping my hand tightly. "Ahmed, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded weakly, unable to find the strength to speak. My body felt heavy and fragile, but my mind was racing. I had just experienced something beyond explanation, beyond anything I had ever imagined possible. The doctors were speaking in hurried tones, their words filled with disbelief. "It's a miracle," one of them said, shaking his head. "We thought we'd lost him." My brother's grip on my hand tightened, and I could hear him whisper, "Alhamdulillah, you're alive." Alive. That word again. It echoed in my mind, but it felt hollow. I hadn't merely been unconscious. I hadn't simply survived a heart attack. What I had experienced couldn't be explained in medical terms. I had stood in the presence of Jesus. I had seen heaven and hell. I had been shown truths that shattered everything I thought I knew about life, faith, and salvation. And now I was back, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by people who couldn't possibly understand what had just happened to me. For hours, I lay there in silence, my family staying by my side, their relief evident in every glance and gesture. But inside I was restless. My thoughts were a storm of questions and emotions. Why had I been brought back? What was I supposed to do now? How could I reconcile everything I had seen and experienced with the life I had known before? And perhaps the heaviest question of all, how would I tell my family and community about this? Late that night, when the hospital had grown quiet and my family had gone home to rest, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter in my mind. The light, the love, the visions, the words of Jesus, they were all so vivid, so undeniable. Yet here I was, back in the mundane reality of this world, trying to make sense of it all. I felt a strange tension between two worlds, as if part of me was still tethered to the divine experience I had just left. I knew that my life could never go back to the way it was, but I didn't know where to begin. In the days that followed, as my body slowly recovered, my mind remained restless. The magnitude of what I had experienced weighed heavily on me. I couldn't shake the memory of Jesus' words, There is more for you to do. You must return and share what you have seen. But how? How could I begin to share something so profound, so transformative, with people who might not believe me? The thought of it filled me with dread. I knew my family and community well. They had always been deeply devout, their lives rooted in the same Islamic teachings that had shaped mine. To them, Jesus was a respected prophet, but nothing more. How could I tell them that I had encountered him as the Son of God, that he had shown me heaven and hell, and that he had invited me to follow him? How could I explain that everything I had believed about salvation and faith had been turned upside down? At first, I kept it all to myself, afraid of what might happen if I spoke out. But the experience was too vivid, too real, to ignore. I couldn't dismiss it as a dream or a hallucination. It wasn't a trick of the mind or the effects of stress. It had been real, more real than anything I had ever experienced. And I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. I began my search for answers. For the first time in my life, I opened a Bible. It felt strange at first, almost forbidden, but I was desperate to understand. I read about Jesus' teachings, his miracles, and his sacrifice. I read about grace, a concept that had once seemed so foreign to me but now felt like a lifeline. The words leapt off the pages, resonating deeply with everything I had seen and heard during my encounter. It was as if the Bible was speaking directly to my soul, confirming the truths I had been shown. As I read, I began to see connections between the Quran and the Bible that I had never noticed before. Passages I had memorized but never fully understood now took on new meaning. Prophecies about the Messiah, about salvation, and about grace suddenly became clear. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could finally see the full picture. But the more I learned, the heavier the weight of my decision became. I couldn't keep this to myself, but I also knew the risks of speaking out. My family had always been proud of my faith and my dedication to Islam. How would they react if I told them that I now believed Jesus was more than a prophet? My community respected me as a devout Muslim. What would they think if I told them about my encounter with Jesus? Would they dismiss me? Reject me? Would I lose the people I loved most? One night, as I lay in bed, the burden became too much to bear. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed to talk to someone I trusted. My younger brother's face came to mind. We had always been close, and while I knew he might struggle to believe me, I also knew he loved me enough to listen. Taking a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed his number. When he answered, I could hear the concern in his voice. "Ahmed, is everything okay?" he asked. "No," I admitted, my voice shaking. "I need to tell you something. Something that happened while I was gone." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," he said cautiously. "What is it?" As I prepared to speak, fear rose in my chest. But then I remembered Jesus' words, "I will be with you always." In that moment, I felt a sense of peace, and I knew I wasn't alone. This was the beginning of a journey I had never expected, and though I didn't know where it would lead, I knew I had to take the first step. Telling my brother about my experience was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. I knew that what I was about to say would challenge everything he believed, just as it had shaken the foundations of my own faith. As I took a deep breath and began to recount what had happened, how I had left my body, how I had seen heaven and hell, and how I had met Jesus, I watched his expression shift from concern to confusion, then disbelief. "Ahmed," he said cautiously when I finished, "are you sure this wasn't just a dream? The mind can do strange things when the body is under stress." I had expected that response. I had asked myself the same question over and over again since waking up in the hospital. But I knew the truth. "It wasn't a dream," I said firmly. "It was more real than anything I've ever known. Jesus was there. He spoke to me. He showed me things I could never have imagined." My brother's face darkened with hesitation. "Jesus is a prophet. That's what we've always been taught. How can you say he's more than that?" I struggled for words. I knew what I was saying was difficult for him to accept. "I don't have all the answers," I admitted. "I'm still trying to understand it myself. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Jesus wasn't just a prophet, he was something more. And he told me to share this truth." He remained silent, absorbing my words. I could see the conflict in his eyes. Part of him wanted to dismiss me, to believe that I had simply been hallucinating or mistaken. But another part of him, the part that knew me, that had seen my devotion and sincerity all my life, was listening. Over the next few days, I carefully began sharing my story with others, friends, members of my community, people I had trusted my whole life. The reactions were mixed. Some, like my brother, were skeptical but willing to listen. Others were outright dismissive, refusing to believe that I had truly encountered Jesus. And some were even angry, accusing me of being misled or deceived. The hardest reaction came from my parents. When I told them about my experience, their faces filled with shock and pain. "Ahmed," my father said, his voice trembling, "how can you say these things? We raised you to honor our faith, to follow the path of Islam. Are you saying everything we've believed is wrong?" His words cut deep. I loved my family. I didn't want to disappoint them. But I couldn't deny the truth of what I had seen. "No," I said gently. "I'm not saying Islam is wrong. But I now understand that Jesus is more than what we were taught. He is the way to God." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Ahmed," she whispered, "what you're saying, it goes against everything we know." I reached for her hand, my own trembling. "I know this is hard to hear. But I need you to know that I'm still me. I still love you. I still believe in God. But I can't ignore what I've experienced." The room was heavy with silence. I knew they were struggling to process my words. I knew that, to them, I had just shattered the foundation of our shared faith. And I had no idea if they would ever accept what I was saying. As time went on, I found myself in an impossible position, torn between the faith I had known all my life and the truth I had come to understand. I didn't want to reject my past. I didn't want to turn my back on my family, my community, or the beliefs that had shaped me. But I also couldn't deny what Jesus had shown me. I began searching for ways to bridge the gap, to find common ground between Islam and Christianity. I knew that many Muslims believed in Jesus as a prophet, but they had never truly considered what the Bible said about him. So I started there. I began studying both the Quran and the Bible, looking for connections, for truths that could open the hearts of those around me. I discovered that the Quran itself spoke of Jesus in ways that hinted at his divine nature. It called him the Messiah. It described him as being born of a virgin, performing miracles, and even returning one day in the end times. These were things no other prophet had ever done. I started conversations with those who were willing to listen, sharing what I had learned. "I'm not asking you to abandon your beliefs," I would tell them. "I'm just asking you to consider that maybe there's more to Jesus than we thought." Some people listened. Some dismissed me outright. But I kept going, fueled by the conviction that I had been given this experience for a reason. I also began speaking to Christians who had never deeply studied Islam. Many of them didn't understand the struggles I faced, the weight of my past beliefs, or the cultural barriers that made it so difficult for Muslims to even consider Jesus as the Son of God. I wanted them to see that conversion wasn't as simple as just choosing to follow Christ. It was a complete transformation, one that often came at great personal cost. Through it all, I felt Jesus guiding me. Even in the face of rejection and doubt, I knew I was not alone. Looking back, I can see how God used every part of my journey, my upbringing, my devotion, even my doubts, to lead me to this moment. The road hasn't been easy. In many ways, I have lost more than I ever expected. Some of my friends have distanced themselves from me. My relationship with my family is strained. And I know there will be more challenges ahead. But even with all of that, I have no regrets. Because what I have gained is greater than anything I have lost. I have found peace, not the fragile kind that depends on my own efforts, but a deep, unwavering peace that comes from knowing I am loved by God, not because of what I do, but because of what Jesus has already done. I have found freedom, freedom from the fear of not being good enough, freedom from the burden of striving to earn my way to God. And above all, I have found the truth. Jesus met me in my moment of greatest need. He showed me that salvation is not about earning God's favor, it's about accepting His love. It's about grace. And that grace is available to everyone. If you've been touched by my story, If you felt even the smallest stirring in your heart, I want to encourage you. Seek the truth. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to challenge what you've always believed. Because I promise you this, when you seek with an open heart, you will find answers. Jesus will meet you where you are, just as he met me. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you have questions, if you want to share your thoughts, or if you need prayer, leave a comment below. And if you're curious to hear more stories like mine, check out the videos on your screen now. Each one is a testament to the power of faith, grace, and the unending love of God. This is just the beginning.